The letter began with my mother's familiar greeting, the one she'd used in every birthday card and note she'd ever written me. Dearest Olivia. I could almost hear her voice, gentle and warm, the way it used to be before the years and the disappointments had built a wall between us. I blinked back tears, forcing myself to focus on the words. If you're reading this, it means your father and I are gone, and you've just sat through what I imagine was a difficult meeting. I'm sorry for that. I know things haven't always been easy between us, and I know you've often felt like you were living in Ethan's shadow. I wish I could say we did a better job of showing you how much we loved you, but I know actions speak louder than words. I hope in some small way this letter can begin to make up for that. I paused, the ache in my chest growing sharper. I'd spent so many years trying to convince myself that I didn't care, that their approval didn't matter. But reading my mother's words, I realized how much I'd wanted it, how much I still did. You always saw the world differently, Olivia. You saw beauty where others saw chaos, possibility where others saw obstacles. I know we didn't always understand your choices, but that doesn't mean we didn't respect them. We just didn't know how to show it. I hope you can forgive us for that. I wiped my eyes, the words blurring on the page. I could feel my mother's presence in the room, as if she were sitting beside me, her hand on my shoulder. There's something you need to know, the letter continued. Something we never told Ethan. Something we kept hidden for reasons that will become clear. When you were born, your grandmother, my mother, set up a trust in your name. She wanted you to have something of your own, something that couldn't be touched by anyone else. She saw your spirit, your creativity, and she wanted to make sure you'd always have the freedom to follow your dreams. The trust is held at First National Bank under your name. The account number and access information are enclosed. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to give you a fresh start, to help you build the life you want. We didn't tell Ethan because we knew he'd try to control it, to use it for his own purposes. This is yours, Olivia. No one else's. My hands shook as I read the account details, neatly typed on a separate slip of paper. I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. All these years I'd assumed I was the forgotten child, the one left behind. But my grandmother had seen me, really seen me, and she'd made sure I'd have something of my own. There's more, the letter went on. In the safe deposit box at the bank, you'll find a collection of letters and journals, my mother's and mine. They tell the story of our family, the real story, not the one Ethan likes to tell at parties. I hope you'll read them, and I hope they help you understand where you come from, and how much you're loved. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in years, I felt seen, understood, valued. I wasn't just the afterthought, the disappointment. I was part of a legacy, a story that stretched back generations. I sat there for a long time, letting the weight of it all settle over me. The anger and resentment I'd carried for so long began to fade, replaced by something softer, something like hope. When I finally left the lawyer's office, the sky had too cleared, the sun breaking through the clouds in golden shafts. I walked past Ethan in the parking lot, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp and impatient. He barely glanced at me, too caught up in his own plans to notice the envelope clutched in my hand. I drove straight to the bank, my heart pounding with anticipation. The woman at the counter was kind, her eyes gentle as she led me to a small private room. She handed me a key and left me alone with the safe deposit box. The day my parents' will was read, the sky was a flat, unremarkable gray, the kind that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I sat in the back of the lawyer's office, hands folded in my lap, trying to ignore the way my brother, Ethan, kept glancing at his watch. He'd always been impatient, but today he was practically vibrating with anticipation. I could see it in the way he tapped his foot, the way he kept smoothing his tie, the way he barely looked at me when I walked in. I wondered if he'd even noticed the way my hands shook as I poured myself a glass of water, or if he cared. Probably not. Ethan had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one my parents had pinned all their hopes and dreams on. I was the afterthought, the quiet one, the one who never quite fit the mold. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, was a thin, precise man with silver hair and a voice that sounded like it had been sanded smooth by years of delivering bad news. He cleared his throat and shuffled the papers in front of him, his eyes flicking between Ethan and me. "Thank you both for coming," he said, his tone formal, almost apologetic. "I know this is a difficult time." Ethan barely nodded, his eyes fixed on the stack of documents. I forced myself to meet Mr. Hargrove's gaze. to sit up straight, to pretend I wasn't dreading what was about to happen. I already knew, of course. I'd known for years. My parents had never been subtle about their preferences. Ethan was the prodigy, the success story, the one who'd gone to the right schools, married the right woman, landed the right job. I was the artist, the dreamer, the one who'd disappointed them at every turn. I'd stopped trying to win their approval a long time ago. But that didn't make today any easier. Mr. Hargrove began to read the will, his voice steady and measured. To our beloved son, Ethan, we leave the family home, all financial assets, and the contents of our safe deposit box. Ethan's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. He didn't even try to hide it. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a mixture of resentment and resignation. I'd expected this. I'd prepared myself for it. But hearing the words out loud still stung. And to our daughter, Olivia, Mr. Hargrove continued, we leave our love and best wishes for her future endeavors. That was it. No house, no money, no heirlooms. Just love and best wishes. I stared at the floor, willing myself not to cry. I wouldn't give Ethan the satisfaction. I wouldn't let him see how much it hurt. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. Well, I guess that settles it, he said, his tone smug. Thanks for coming, Liv. I'll let you know when I decide what to do with the house. Maybe I'll sell it, maybe I'll keep it. We'll see. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand an explanation. But I didn't. I just sat there silent while Ethan basked in his victory. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat again, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Actually, there's one more thing, he said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. My name was written on the front in my mother's elegant handwriting. Ethan's smile faltered. What's that? He asked, his voice sharp. Mr. Hargrove slid the envelope across the table to me. Your parents left specific instructions that this was to be given to you after the will was read. Privately, if you prefer. I stared at the envelope, my heart pounding. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just looked at my name, the familiar loops and flourishes of my mother's script. I reached out with trembling fingers and picked it up, the wax seal cool and smooth beneath my thumb. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What is it? Let me see. I shook my head, clutching the envelope to my chest. It's addressed to me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Hargrove nodded. It's Olivia's to open. Ethan, I'm afraid I can't share its contents with anyone else unless she wishes. Ethan scowled, but he didn't argue. He just sat back, arms crossed, watching me with a mixture of suspicion and annoyance. I stood up, the envelope still pressed to my chest. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'd like a moment alone, if that's all right. Mr. Hargrove nodded, gathering the rest of the papers. Of course. Take all the time you need. Ethan shot me one last glare before storming out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. I waited until the door clicked shut behind him before sinking back into my chair, the envelope trembling in my hands. For a long moment, I just stared at it, afraid to break the seal, afraid of what I might find inside. Was it another disappointment? Another reminder that I'd never been enough? Or was it something more? Something my parents had kept hidden, even from Ethan? I took a deep breath and slid my finger under the wax, breaking the seal with a soft pop. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in thirds. I unfolded it, my hands shaking, and began to read. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the journals and letters spread out before me like a map of a world I'd never known existed. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. I traced my grandmother's words with my fingertip, feeling the grooves of her pen, the weight of her thoughts. Each entry was a window into her life, her fears, her triumphs. She wrote about the war, about rationing sugar and sewing her own dresses, about falling in love with my grandfather and losing him too soon. She wrote about my mother, about the day she left for college, about the pride and the ache of letting go. And she wrote about me, the granddaughter, she'd hoped would carry on her spirit of independence and creativity. I read until my eyes burned, until the words blurred together and the past felt as real as the present. I found myself laughing at her jokes, crying at her losses, marveling at her resilience. I realized for the first time that I wasn't alone. I was part of a chain, a line of women who had faced the world on their own terms, who had refused to be defined by anyone else's expectations. As the hours slipped by, I thought about Ethan, about the way he'd strutted out of the lawyer's office, certain he'd won. I wondered if he'd ever understand what he'd really been given, and what he'd lost. The house, the money, the safe deposit box he'd assumed was his. But the real inheritance, the one that mattered, was here in these pages, in these stories, in the quiet strength that ran through our family like a hidden river. The next morning, I called Mr. Hargrove. I wanted to thank him, to let him know how much the letter had meant to me. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm and measured as ever. "Olivia," he said, "I'm glad you called. I was hoping to hear from you. We talked for a while. About my parents, about the will, about the trust my grandmother had set up. He told me how much my mother had worried about me, how she'd agonized over the decision to keep the trust a secret. She wanted to protect you," he said. "She knew how things were with Ethan. She wanted you to have something that was just yours." I thanked him again, my voice thick with emotion. "I wish she'd told me," I said. "I wish I'd known." "She wanted to," he replied gently. "But sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to let go." After I hung up, I sat for a long time, staring out the window at the morning light. I thought about all the times I'd felt invisible, all the times I'd convinced myself that I didn't matter. I realized now that I'd been wrong. I mattered. My story mattered. And I had the power to decide what happened next. I spent the next few days sorting through the journals and letters, piecing together the story of my family. I learned things I'd never known, about my grandmother's dreams, about my mother's regrets, about the choices that had shaped our lives. I found a letter my mother had written to me on the day I was born, her hopes and fears spilling across the page in a rush of emotion. I found a photograph of my grandmother as a young woman, her eyes bright with determination, her smile fierce and unyielding. With each discovery, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain of who I was. I started to see my parents not as distant, judgmental figures, but as people flawed, complicated, doing their best with what they had. I forgave them, a little at a time, as I read their words and saw the world through their eyes. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a box of old photographs, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for whatever he might say. "Liv," he said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." I could hear the strain in his voice, the edge of desperation he was trying to hide. "What is it, Ethan?" "I've been going through the house," he said, "and I found some things, letters, journals, stuff from Mom and Grandma. I thought you should have them." I was surprised. I'd expected him to throw everything away, to erase any trace of the past that didn't fit his version of events. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I'd like that." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Liv," he said finally. "I know things haven't been fair. I know I haven't always been kind." I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. "It's okay, Ethan," I said. "We all did the best we could." He sighed, the sound heavy with regret. "I'll leave the box on the porch. You can pick it up whenever you want." After we hung up, I sat in silence, the weight of the past settling around me like a blanket. I realized that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of anger. It was about making space for something new, for hope, for healing. That evening, I drove to the old house, the one Ethan now called his own. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow over the steps. A cardboard box sat by the door, filled with letters, photographs, and a faded quilt my grandmother had made. I picked it up, cradling it in my arms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Back at my apartment, I set the box on the kitchen table and took a deep breath before opening it. The scent of old paper and lavender drifted up, a memory of my grandmother's house, of summers spent in her garden, of laughter and stories told under the shade of the big oak tree. I lifted out the quilt first, running my fingers over the careful stitches, the bright patches of fabric that told their own story. Each square was a piece of our family's history, a scrap from my mother's wedding dress, a bit of my father's favorite shirt, a swatch from the curtains that used to hang in the living room. I wrapped it around my shoulders, feeling the warmth seep into my bones. Beneath the quilt were more letters, some addressed to me, others to my mother, a few to Ethan. I sorted them into piles, marveling at the way my grandmother's handwriting changed over the years, growing shakier but never losing its elegance. I found a letter she'd written to my mother on the day Ethan was born, full of hope and advice and gentle warnings about the dangers of favoritism. I wondered if my mother had ever read it, if she'd understood what her own mother was trying to say. As I read, I began to see my family in a new light. The stories I'd told myself for so long, the ones about being unwanted, about never measuring up, started to unravel. I saw the ways my parents had struggled, the pressures they'd faced, the mistakes they'd made. I saw the love that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface, tangled up in fear and pride and the weight of expectations. One letter, written in my mother's careful script, caught my eye. It was dated just a few months before she died. "My dearest Olivia," it began, "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye. I know I've hurt you and I'm sorry. I wish I could go back and do things differently. But all I can do now is tell you how proud I am of you. You have a strength I never had, a courage I can only admire. I hope you'll forgive me for the times I failed you. I hope you'll remember the good moments, the laughter, the love. You are my daughter, and I love you more than words can say." I pressed the letter to my heart, tears streaming down my face. For so long, I'd carried the weight of her disappointment, the sting of her silence. But here, in her own words, was the truth I'd been searching for. She loved me. She was proud of me, and she wanted me to be happy. I spent the next few days lost in the past, reading and rereading the letters, piecing together the story of my family. I found myself reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with people I'd lost touch with over the years. I started painting again, filling canvas after canvas with the colors and shapes of my memories. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years, a lightness that came from letting go of old hurts and embracing the possibility of something new. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out a closet, I found a box of my own childhood drawings. I laughed at the crooked houses, the stick figure families, the wild, impossible animals. I remembered the way my mother used to hang my artwork on the fridge, the way my father would pretend to guess what each picture was, always getting it wrong on purpose to make me laugh. I realized that even in the midst of all the tension and disappointment, there had been moments of joy, moments of connection. I decided to visit the cemetery to say goodbye in my own way. I brought a bouquet of wildflowers and one of my paintings, a bright, swirling landscape that reminded me of the view from my grandmother's porch. I sat by their graves, the sun warm on my face, and told them everything I'd learned. I told them about the trust, about the journals, about the forgiveness I was finally able to offer. I told them I loved them and that I was ready to move forward. As I left, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I wasn't defined by my parents' choices, or by Ethan's success, or by the stories I'd told myself for so long. I was my own person, with my own dreams, my own strengths, my own legacy. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Mr. Hargrove. He'd found another envelope, tucked away in a file, addressed to both Ethan and me. He invited us to his office, saying it was important that we read it together. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face Ethan again. But curiosity got the better of me. When we arrived, Mr. Hargrove greeted us with a small, knowing smile. He handed us the envelope and stepped out of the room, giving us privacy. Ethan and I sat in silence for a moment, the tension between us thick and uncomfortable. Finally, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It was from our father, written in his bold, familiar hand. "My dear children," he began, "I know things haven't always been easy between you. I know we made mistakes, and I'm sorry for the pain we caused. But I want you to remember that you're family, and that matters more than anything else. Take care of each other, forgive each other, and never forget where you come from." Ethan looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Liv," he whispered, "for everything." I reached for his hand, and for the first time in years, I felt hope. We left the lawyer's office together, the letter from our father folded carefully between us, a fragile bridge over years of distance. Outside, the air was crisp and bright, the kind of day that makes you believe in second chances. Ethan and I walked in silence for a while, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I could feel the old patterns tugging at me, the urge to retreat, to protect myself, to keep my heart guarded, but something had shifted. The words from our parents, the stories from our grandmother, the forgiveness I'd found in myself, they'd all worked together to loosen the knots I'd carried for so long. Ethan broke the silence first. "I always thought I had to be perfect," he said, his voice low. "That if I wasn't, I'd lose everything. I guess I never realized how much pressure that put on you, too." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the golden child I'd resented, but my brother, flawed, uncertain, trying to find his way just like me. We both lost something, I said quietly, but maybe we can start over. He nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at his lips. I'd like that. We made a plan to meet for coffee the next week, to talk about the house, about the things we wanted to keep, about the memories we wanted to share. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a brother again. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my art, pouring everything I'd learned, everything I'd felt, into my work. I painted the stories from my grandmother's journals, the landscapes from my childhood, the faces of the women who had shaped me. I started showing my work at a local gallery, and to my surprise, people responded. They saw themselves in my paintings, in the colors and shapes and stories I'd woven together. I realized that my art was more than just a hobby. It was a way to connect, to heal, to honor the legacy I'd inherited. Ethan kept his promise. We met for coffee every week, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. We sorted through the house together, laughing over old photographs, arguing good-naturedly over who got to keep the ugly lamp from the living room. We found a box of our childhood toys in the attic, and for a moment, we were just kids again, free from the weight of expectations and disappointments. One afternoon, as we were packing up the last of our parents' things, Ethan turned to me. "Do you ever wonder what they'd think of us now?" he asked. I smiled, thinking of the letters, the journals, the trust my grandmother had left me. "I think they'd be proud," I said. "Not because of what we have, but because of who we've become." He nodded, his eyes shining. I hope so. As the months passed, I found myself growing stronger, more confident. The trust my grandmother had set up gave me the freedom to take risks, to invest in my art, to build a life on my own terms. I started teaching art classes at the community center, sharing what I'd learned with others who felt lost or overlooked. I watched as my students found their own voices, their own stories, their own strength. Ethan, too, began to change. He let go of the need to be perfect, to always be in control. He started volunteering at a local shelter, using his skills to help others. He apologized to people he'd hurt, made amends where he could. We weren't the same people we'd been at the reading of the will, and I was grateful for that. One evening, as I was closing up the gallery after a successful show, I found a note tucked into my bag. It was from Ethan. "Thank you," it read, "for forgiving me, for being my sister, for reminding me that family is more than just blood or inheritance. It's love. It's forgiveness. It's starting over." I pressed the note to my heart, feeling the truth of his words. We'd both been given a second chance, not just to rebuild our relationship, but to redefine what family meant to us. We'd inherited more than just money or possessions. We'd inherited a legacy of resilience, of hope, of love. As I walked home that night, the city lights twinkling around me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I knew there would still be hard days, still be moments of doubt and regret. But I also knew that I was strong enough to face them, that I was surrounded by the love and wisdom of the women who had come before me. And for the first time, I was excited for what the future might hold. The first spring after everything changed, I found myself standing in the garden behind my apartment, sunlight warming my face, the scent of new grass and lilacs drifting on the breeze. I'd planted a few wildflower seeds in the fall, not expecting much. But now the earth was bursting with color, pinks, yellows, blues, all tangled together in a riot of life. I knelt in the dirt, my hands stained with soil, and thought about how much had grown in me too. The pain and resentment that once choked my heart had given way to something softer, something that felt like forgiveness, like hope. Ethan came by that afternoon, carrying a box of old family recipes he'd found tucked away in a kitchen drawer. We sat on the back steps, flipping through cards written in our mother's looping script, laughing at her notes in the margins. "Add more cinnamon if you're feeling bold. Don't let Ethan near the frosting." For the first time in years, we talked about her without bitterness, remembering the good as well as the hard. We made plans to cook one of her favorite dishes together, to invite a few friends, to fill the house with laughter and the smell of baking bread. Later, as the sun dipped low, Ethan lingered at the gate. "You know," he said, "I used to think the only thing that mattered was what Mom and Dad left us. The house, the money, all of it. But now I think the real inheritance was this, us together, figuring it out." He looked at me, his eyes clear and honest. I'm glad you got that envelope, Liv. I'm glad you found what you needed. I smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle deep inside me. Me too, I said. I think maybe we both did. That night, I sat at my desk, the journals and letters spread out before me, and began to write my own story. I wrote about the girl who always felt like an afterthought, about the woman who learned to see herself through the eyes of those who truly loved her. I wrote about the pain of being overlooked, the freedom of letting go, the quiet power of forgiveness. I wrote about my grandmother's wisdom, my mother's regrets, my brother's transformation. I wrote about the wildflowers blooming in my garden, about the way sunlight feels on your skin after a long winter, about the hope that comes from starting over. As the words spilled onto the page, I realized I was no longer writing just for myself. I was writing for every woman who'd ever felt invisible, for every daughter who'd ever wondered if she was enough, for every family that had been torn apart by secrets and silence. I was writing to say, you are seen, you are loved, you are stronger than you know. The months slipped by, each one bringing new challenges, new joys. My art classes grew, my paintings found new homes, my circle of friends widened. I watched as Ethan built a life that was his own, not the one our parents had mapped out for him. We celebrated birthdays and holidays together, sometimes with tears, always with laughter. We learned to lean on each other, to forgive each other, to cherish the messy, beautiful family we'd become. On the anniversary of our parents' passing, Ethan and I returned to the old house one last time. We walked through the empty rooms, sunlight streaming through the windows, dust motes dancing in the air. We shared stories, packed away the last of the memories, and locked the door behind us. As we stood on the porch, keys in hand, I felt a sense of closure, of gratitude for all that had been and all that was still to come. We drove to the cemetery together, arms full of wildflowers from my garden. We laid them on our parents' graves, the colors bright against the gray stone. I whispered a quiet thank you for the lessons, for the love, for the chance to begin again. That evening, back in my apartment, I hung the last of my grandmother's quilts on the wall, a tapestry of our family's history. I looked around at the life I'd built, at the art and the laughter and the love that filled every corner. I thought about the envelope, about the secrets it had held, about the way it had changed everything. I realized that the greatest gift my parents had given me wasn't money or property, or even the trust my grandmother had set up. It was the chance to find my own way, to write my own story, to become the person I was always meant to be. As I turned out the lights and climbed into bed, I felt a deep, abiding peace. I knew there would still be hard days, still be moments of doubt and longing. But I also knew that I was not alone, that I was part of something bigger, something lasting. I was the keeper of my family's legacy, the author of my own future, the sister, the daughter, the woman who had finally learned to claim her place in the world. And as I drifted off to sleep, the last words of my mother's letter echoed in my mind. You are loved, Olivia, always.